Well, hello. I'm Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. The NFL draft concluded just a couple of days ago, and in this video, I'm going to go over my grades for the AFC teams. I gave every team a grade and how good they did in the draft. We ranked every AFC team from 16 to 1, as well as every team from 32 to 1, so you'll be able to actively keep up with those as we go on. Dropping tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central, or 6 p.m. Central, my fault, we have the NFC grades, so make sure you guys are on the lookout for those as well. But other than that, let's get right into this video. I don't want to keep you guys here for much longer. So we are going to start ourselves here at number 16 with the New York Jets, who also had the worst draft of any team in the NFL. And primarily because they did not have a wow pick whatsoever. As you can tell here by all the colors, just the darker colors, you can just tell the best pick that they had was a C. Not a C, not even a C plus, just a C. And it started with their second worst selection, which was absolutely reaching for Will McDonald, edge rusher out of Iowa State. He was number 51 on my big board, B grade, late second round talent, and they picked him at 15. So he was on my board. He was the 11th best edge, and he was the 4th taken off the board as the number 8 left, and you had bigger needs too. Not only did you reach for Will McDonald, you had bigger needs at defensive line on the inside. Safety was a bigger need. Tight end was even a bigger need too. I don't know if you're going to roll forward with Uzama and Conklin. And I know you have Quentin Williams on the inside, but who do you have opposite of that? Pretty sure it's Sheldon Rankins, if I'm not mistaken. Nonetheless, it's not good on the other side. If you want to buff up that front four, you're better off drafting an interior defensive lineman, in which you had Kalijah Cansey on the board. You also had a need at offensive tackle, but I understand you're not going to reach on Anton Harrison here. But other than that, you might as well have taken Kalijah Cansey or Brian Bryce to go on the opposite side of Quentin Williams. But you pick Will McDonald instead. Pretty big reach for a position you didn't really need. You got a D plus grade out of that pick. And you got a C grade for Joe Tippmann, who is not bad. He was number 85 on my big board, which is a late third, early fourth round talent. Number 4 interior offensive line. The number 3 left on the board. You had John Michael Schmitz and Weipler. This was actually the number 4 left on the board. You had John Michael Schmitz and Luke Weipler at center, and you still took Joe Tippmann. So Tippmann was a slight reach, and note the needs. Interior D lineman was available. Safety, tight end. After this point, tight end wasn't a need because you needed a starting and not a depth piece because you have Ruckert as well on the bench. But Tippmann was a slight reach here. You got a C grade. Then Carter Warren, who is an undrafted talent, one of the best undrafted talents. And it's no point. Depth is not needed at offensive tackle here. And plus, undrafted talent in the 4th round is a bit of a reach, but it would have been more understanding if you needed that offensive tackle depth. And you're still ignoring both interior defensive line and safety. And then you make it even worse with the selection of Israel Abanikanda in the 5th round, which I gave a C minus as well. He was the 138th on my board, which you picked him at 143, which isn't bad. But he was the 9th best running back on the board. Solid value selection, but you didn't need running back. Breece Hall, you have Michael Carter, who you just drafted, I think it was the 2nd or 3rd round just a couple years back. And Zonovan Knight had a good year last year as well. But you still take running back. When you still have D-line and safety, you don't make it any better by selecting an undrafted talent, not like a very low undrafted talent at linebacker in Zaire Barnes. It was at linebacker, in my eyes, it was starter or nothing because you have depth at linebacker, but you don't have great starting talent there. I know a lot of Jets fans believe Quincy Williams was good. He was not good last year, but it was starter or nothing for Jets, and they're still ignoring D-line and safety, of course. They didn't take a single one of those in this draft, which is another reason why they're a D+. And then they had Jarek Bernard, another undrafted talent in my eyes. Got a C grade. Solid depth selection, but there were better options available at DB. at both corner and safety. You can play Bernard at safety if you want, but they were still better at safety. It's one guy I'm thinking of that went undrafted that I just don't have at the top of my head. Some safety that went undrafted that had really high. Nonetheless, though, there were better options available at both corner and safety. And now you take tight end in the 7th round with Zach Kuntz, which is a fantastic value selection, but I still gave it a C-. He was the 2nd best tight end on the board, 8th best tight end in this draft. But you already have Uzomah, you already have Conklin, you already have Ruckert. If you see Kuntz as a 7th round guy, he's not going to play, and he might just get cut. He's currently your 5th string tight end. So this selection was just a waste of a pick. The Jets got a D+. I almost gave them a D because of how high their ceiling was, but they had just a consistent C picks, so they get a D+. We move on to number 15, and that is Kansas City Chiefs. So Kansas City, I thought they had a good draft, but apparently not. Apparently they didn't really have a good draft. So Felix Anudike-Uzomah is where it starts. They picked him with the last pick in the 1st round. He was my number 48 prospect on the board, B grade, late 2nd round, and he was my 10th best edge with number 5 on the board, and it was a good positional need here. So you're smart for picking edge, but there's better options still on the board. Up to this point, B.J. Ojulari was still on the board, and even if you want to pick a 4-3 guy who's used to a 4-3, I mean, Ojulari can play that, but Isaiah Foskey was on the board. Nolan Smith went off the pick before. He can't really do much there. Derek Hall was on the board, and was he? Yeah, no, he was number 11. That's my fault. But nonetheless, you had better options at edge, and you chose Felix Anudike-Uzomah. It's still a B-, is still solid. And then you upped it. A lot of people didn't like this pick, but I love this pick. If you've been watching my channel for the last couple of months, you know I've been very high on Rashee Rice. And him at number 55 was fantastic value. He was number 37 on my big board, number 5 wide receiver, and the best wide receiver on the board. It's not a wow pick because it was not your biggest positional need, which is offensive tackle. But nonetheless, still amazing value here. You're getting Mahomes a new target, which is always a good idea, and you chose the best wide receiver on the board. So there you go. And then you took your offensive tackle, but you reached a little bit on Wanya Morris, who was, I believe, the 7th offensive tackle taken, and he was my 13th offensive tackle in this draft. 147th on my big board, 5th round talent. Took him in the 3rd. You get a C grade out of that. And it's a positional need, but you could have made a better selection this early. I believe at this point, the best offensive tackle on the board. I have to look, guys. I don't even remember my own big board. At this point, it was DeJuan Jones. Jalen Duncan was available. Blake Freeland was available. Even Warren McClendon would have brought in a better pick than this, but I guess it is positional need, so it's still got a C grade. And then just like Wanya Morris, this is in the same mindset with Shamari Connor, who also got a C grade. You need safety, but there were so many better options, including the biggest steal in this draft, which I have is Christopher Smith, which we'll get into later with another AFC West team. He was the 10th best safety on the board. I had him at a 7th round grade. I just think another pretty big reach, but you needed the position, so it's good nonetheless. And then you take another edge in B.J. Thompson. He was an undrafted free agent. There were so many options available for the Chiefs here at edge rusher at pick 166. Just to name a few. I know Andre Carter went undrafted, but he was on the board. You had guys like Robert Beal Jr. would have been a better selection here. Other undrafted talents, Iku Leota, Caleb Murphy was on the board. Brenton Cox was on the board. He went undrafted. But a lot of these guys that were better talents went undrafted, but still, B.J. Thompson, I didn't have him at near being a draftable talent. Keandre Coburn, on the other hand, just missed my big board, but he's still an undrafted talent. I gave him a D because you don't need defensive tackle depth. Plus, you chose the worst Texas defensive tackle. Moro Ojomo was still on the board, and you chose Keandre Coburn. I gave that a D. And then a good end to the draft here with Nick Jones, undrafted free agent. He was not on my board, but still a good position. The position needed depth, and it was still a pretty good selection nonetheless. All right, number 14, and this kind of was unavoidable unless you absolutely blew it out of the park with Miami. 26th overall, 14th in the AFC. But it started with Cam Smith, which a lot of people are going to say is better than a C+. Excuse me, but I had him at a C+. He was a B- grade, my number 72 on my board. The 12th best corner with the number 6 left on the board. And I'm not as high on Cam Smith as a lot of other people are. I get why he was drafted this high, but you had better options. I keep saying that there are better options than Cam Smith at this point. Just to name a few as I go through my big board, Keely Ringo fell all the way to the 4th round, but he was a better selection. DJ Turner, Tyreek Stevenson, Garrett Williams were selected just after you. And even Clark Phillips would have been a better selection year, especially noting that nickelback is probably the biggest need in the defensive back room. As well, you move on here, and good. This would have been a great selection if it wasn't Miami, who was one of the best running back rooms in the country. Devon Achane here, number 63 on my board, the number 1 running back on the board up to this point. But you don't need running back. Raheem Mostert is a top 15 running back in the league. Jeff Wilson's one of the probably a top 5 backup in this league. Even Salvon Ahmed is a really good backup as well. But now you take Devon Achane, and now you're kind of just leaving Ahmed in the dust. Even Myles Gaskin's probably going to be gone, which I'm fine with that. But still, I did not like this selection for positional need. And then Elijah Higgins at 6'197", he was my 244th on the board. He was the 15th wide receiver, but apparently they're switching him to tight end, in which I don't see him fitting into Miami's offense that way. I still see him as a worse tight end than someone like Durham Smythe and Eric Saubert even on that roster. I don't see why Higgins would be a tight end even in this offense. I think wide receiver depth would be better, but I just didn't like the pick. And then they go out of the park here in the 7th round with an A+ selection, Ryan Hayes, 181th on my board, the number 1 offensive tackle on the board up to this point. And it was just extremely good value for an O-line where you need a lot of depth. So it was just an elite selection overall. Again, Miami kind of got the bad end of the stick here. They only had 4 picks. They probably should have added more. Nonetheless, still not that bad of a draft. Moving on to number 13, we jump a few NFC teams here for Jacksonville, who was number 22nd. So we jumped over 3 NFC teams, and Jacksonville comes in at 13 in the AFC, 22 overall. And it started with Anton Harrison. The start of this draft was not great, but they did have 13 picks, which is pretty solid. But Anton Harrison started it. He was the number 1 offensive tackle on the board. 44th on the board, which is close enough to 27. The problem I had with this selection is I don't think he was worthy of going number 27. Noting that you guys probably did have bigger needs on the defensive side of the ball. Even at offensive tackle, I know you don't believe in Walker Little at right tackle, but I think Anton Harrison was a slight reach here, which is why he got a B. And then a big reach here at pick 61 for Brenton Strange, who you picked over a few guys who were actually ranked a lot higher on my board, especially noting Darnell Washington. I know he fell a lot, but I mean, even Tucker Kraft was on the board up to this point. And Zach Kuntz was even better, and he went all the way in the 7th round. So, as I mentioned with the Jets, but nonetheless, I think Brenton Strange was just a big reach for a tight end. He was my number 9 tight end in this class, the 5th best on the board, 116th out of all prospects. And the depth was needed, though, and they got a better tight end in Leonard Taylor in undrafted free agency. I just want to point that out. That's really good for them. Good job to pick up one of the best undrafted free agents out there. And then Tank Bigsby got a B- at pick 88. And again, there are better running backs on the board, solid depth pick. You give Etienne the flexibility to now work as a gadget player instead of that 3-down back. And Bigsby, but there were 5 running backs better than Bigsby on the board. Just to name the top 2 or 3 that were still on the board at 88. Sean Tucker went undrafted. I won't talk about him. Zach Evans went in the 7th round. Rashawn Johnson would have been a better pick. Chase Brown would have been a better pick too. So I don't know. I think there were better running backs on the board. That's why it got a B-. And then Ventrell Miller, linebacker, got a C+, as well as Yasir Abdullah also got a C+. In terms of Ventrell Miller, he was the 12th best linebacker on the board. You had a lot of guys, especially when Miller's a 6th round talent, just like right there on the edge of 6th and 7th round talent. It's just a massive reach in the 4th round, especially when there's 11 linebackers better than Ventrell Miller. And there's also 11 linebackers better than the next pick in Yasir Abdullah, or the next linebacker pick. And you can play Abdullah at edge, so at least you have that flexibility to make that a nice pick. But again, a massive reach. He was a 7th round talent. And then Tyler Lacey in between those two at D-line, 246th on my board, 7th round talent. And you can play him on the outside or inside. He'll probably play defensive end in the Jaguar system, but that still makes him the 8th best interior defensive lineman on the board. So you just continue to reach for these guys, and Jacksonville just didn't have a good draft up until this point, where they make an A+ selection in Antonio Johnson, who is my 60th best player on the board. 4th best safety, number 2 on the board, behind Christopher Smith, who went 10 picks later. And they got an A+, even though he wasn't the best safety on the board, because now you basically bring in a DB. He can play safety, corner, or nickel. And now you bring in a good depth selection in that DB room, potential nickelback starter next season, or even as a rookie, good starting potential. And he was a early to mid 3rd round talent, in my opinion. So good selection here. And they continue the trend with the A's for Parker Washington, who was 158th on my board, number 18 receiver, number 6 left on the board, 5th round talent, got him in the 6th. Pretty good selection. I see Our Lads actually has him as a 3rd string slot. I don't see why. I think Parker Washington could provide a good depth on the outside, and I think he could probably be a rotational piece right early on as a rookie, especially with the Jaguars. So I don't think this is not a reach whatsoever. Then they get back to the reaches that you got. Just to note, 5 straight undrafted talents for these last 5 picks. Christian Braswell at corner. There are a lot of good corners still on the board. You pick them for depth, and you got a cut candidate. Eric Hallett, defensive back. You can play him at corner or safety. You don't need to take another defensive back, especially when that back is a cut candidate. Cooper Hodges, undrafted talent. You needed offensive tackle depth, but interior O-line was needed a lot more. So still got a B- for that selection, though, so not bad. Back to the C's with Raymond Vohasek, which actually he went to. I didn't realize this. He graduated from a school right around me, so that's actually that's pretty cool. But I'm not gonna use that that personal story to elevate him past the C+, since there were still much better options, including Jared Clark, who went undrafted. And then you got a guy, I don't know if he's going to play on defense at edge or interior defensive line or even fullback, which he's listed as on Our Lads. But he's not on my board, but still a very versatile option. That's why I got a B grade. That's Jacksonville. We move on to number 12, which this is the New England Patriots. They had one of the best steals in this draft, and they still couldn't keep it consistent despite having 12 selections. So we start with one of the biggest steals, A+ in Christian Gonzalez. Number 9 on my board, the number 1 cornerback, and he ended up being the 3rd one selected. It was just great value. You needed the position. I expected them to take corner, and they still traded down to get Christian Gonzalez, so they got more picks. So that's an absolutely fantastic value there. I wanted them to take him at 14, still got him at 17, so good pick there. And then Keon White with an A-. He was the number 1 edge on the board. That's why he got that. Not the biggest need for the Patriots, but noting that he can still play on the inside of the line that's still pretty notable. Number 9 edge in general, mid-second round talent, got him in the mid-second round. At least they got the best edge. And then it kind of goes very downhill from there. Marte Mapu In the third round, I had him as a 5th-round talent, number 8 linebacker on the board. And I originally had this at a D+, but now I'm hearing he's going to play safety, which that's a good switch, but it's still a reach for a 5th-round talent nonetheless. And then, especially you got a guy who's, what am I thinking of? Jordan Battle, DeMarvion Overshone was still on the board. He would have been a much better switch to safety. Then Jake Andrews on the interior offensive line, undrafted talent, a massive reach for a backup center. I understand David Andrews is getting old, but he's not going to be your backup center. Come on. Chad Ryland as well. He's not on my board, and Nick Folk is fine. So why are you taking a kicker in the 4th round? That's what I think about that pick. And then even Sidy So, he's not on my board either. He just missed the board, to be fair, but that's 3 straight undrafted free agent talents in the 4th round. This pick is better than Andrews nonetheless, so I just have that at a D+. C grade out of Mafi, who is now, this would have been good. This would have been a higher pick if you picked him at 107 even. That's another interior offensive line. You didn't need that much depth, that interior offensive line. He's the number 10 on the board. It's still a reach nonetheless. He's 7th-round talent on my board, but it's still the best interior line they picked. It's just they didn't need it again. But now they get back to the A's with Keyshawn Boutte, 154th on my board, the 17th best wide receiver and the 5th best available. This was just great talent at this point for Boutte, and it was a position that needed depth. So good selection here by the Patriots. Right back to the mid. Bryce Behringer, now you get your punter. I believe you guys just picked up the Broncos' old punter. I don't know if you need Bryce Behringer. It's not worth it knowing that he's an undrafted free agent talent. To be fair, I only had one punter that I thought was draftable, and he went undrafted, Adam Korsak out of Rutgers. He's not even on a team yet, but he's got mini camp workouts coming up. And then your second F selection into Mario Douglas, he's not on my board. Undrafted wide receiver, you already picked Boutte. It's just you don't need Mario Douglas. You don't need more depth of wide receiver. This guy's going to get cut. Amir Speed, he's another guy not on my board. Just like DeMario Douglas, but at least you're getting better value at a team or a position that needs more depth. And then Isaiah Bolden ends it off. Just a good. He's not on my board, but you select him at 245, almost the end of the draft, and he's just good value all around for this late of a selection. B- for the Patriots today. And then we move on. Another team that got a very solid steal that still didn't fare out well. And that's the Los Angeles Chargers at number 11. They another one that jumps a bunch of teams here for number 17 now ranked wise across the NFL, and you're still only 11. So you have 6. After this, you're at 10. You have 10 AFC teams and 6 NFC teams. So AFC kind of dominating this draft, and that'll even show you later. Quinn Johnston started this off. He was number 7 on my board. Number 1 wide receiver, number 1 left on my board as well. It's literally a Mike Williams, literally exactly just like Mike Williams, but it was not the biggest need for Los Angeles, in which they addressed it with the next selection, yet they reached for it. It was Tuli Tuipulotu, who was I scouted him as an edge, but he's likely going to be playing on the interior defensive line since he's not an outside linebacker type player. My 102 on my board, number 17th edge, 6th best on the board up to this point. And again, it was a slight reach, but still solid value for the selection. And then you got Diane Henley at number 85. Number 88 on my board, late 3rd, early 4th round grade. Number 5 linebacker, the 3rd best linebacker on board. And that's the reason it didn't get a higher grade. It's because there were 2 better linebackers in Trenton Simpson and Henry To'o. But nonetheless, still good value at that point. That's why I got an A-. And from there, you're kind of like, Chargers have a really good draft so far. And then it kind of just falls apart. You take the next 4 picks. So more than half of your draft were undrafted talents. And it starts with Darius Davis, who is not an F because depth is needed at wide receiver, but there are so many options at this point, and you picked an undrafted talent just to get another TCU wide receiver. I don't see the hype there. And then Jordan McFadden on the interior offensive line. Again, good depth selection, but you had better options at interior offensive line, especially noting that he was an undrafted talent. Same thing, Scott Matlock. You needed starting defensive line. You didn't particularly need depth on the interior defensive line, and you took an undrafted free agent talent. That's noting something, but it's still got a D+ since it's later on in the draft. And then they get a B+ though out of an undrafted talent in Max Duggan. Still good 7th-round value at quarterback despite him being an undrafted talent. QB3 is a pretty good selection to get a QB3 up at this point. So the Chargers got a B grade. Cleveland is up next, another team with 7 selections, and they got the biggest steal, the second biggest steal in this draft, and they still came out with a B+. So the team with the biggest steal, again, on a little bit later, another AFC West team, you'll see them here just in a little bit, but Browns get a B+ despite getting the biggest steal, and that's because their first pick was Cedric Tillman. A lot of people are high on Cedric Tillman. I really do not see it. He's my number 26 wide receiver and the 16th best on the board up to this point. Again, I'm very low on Tillman. Plus, I like Donovan Peoples-Jones. I don't think they needed wide receiver too much, but I understand why you take one at 74. Not going to be a lot of good ones later on, but you took Cedric Tillman. I don't like the pick. Siaki Ika got a B+ coming in at 98. He was the 4th best interior defensive lineman on the board. Jared Clark is literally a better version of Ika in my opinion, even though Clark went undrafted. But still, a solid value selection here. You get a good bull rusher on the inside, and you need interior defensive linemen pretty bad. And then you get a big steal. You got 2 really big steals, and it starts with DeJuan Jones. And the reason that DeJuan Jones is not higher is because you don't really need offensive tackle. You needed that interior offensive line, which we'll get to in a second, in the second biggest steal of the draft. But nonetheless, he was number 1 offensive tackle on the board, 6th in general, 58th on board, which is a late second-round talent in the 4th round. But still, you had bigger needs than offensive tackle depth. Don't see the reason why. But then you take that bigger need in Isaiah McGuire, who was the 6th best edge on board, 148th in general for when everyone's on the board. Now you hit your need now, which is good. There were better options, but still a good value selection nonetheless. Now, here's something that is really team-based. I gave Dorian Thompson-Robinson a D because he's an undrafted talent for me, but he would have been great in a creative offense like Kansas City, a team like that. So if Cleveland can get creative with him, like possibly play him at running back or even tight end or wide receiver, wide receiver. If they can get creative with Thompson-Robinson, this could pay off, but I don't see the Browns doing that. So they get a D grade for taking DTR. At 142, you got Cameron Mitchell, just 2 picks later. B-. He's not, or no, he is on my board. He's almost off my board. He's a 7th-round talent, 30th best cornerback in this draft, and the 13th best on the board. And at this point, you're in the 5th round, so, I mean, even reaching for a guy like that, is, if you need the position, it's not bad. And then at Luke Weipler, who is the 2nd biggest steal in this draft at pick 190 to the Browns, the number 3 best interior offensive lineman on the board, number 1 left, and number 55 on the board at pick 190. This was just an elite steal. Plus, if Pochik doesn't work out, I know he subbed in for injury and really did really well. If he doesn't work out in the long run, though, now you got Luke Weipler. You're really good at developing those interior offensive linemen. So when you get the best on the board, especially when he was probably supposed to go in the late 2nd round, fantastic selection for Cleveland. They get a B+. Moving on, number 9. Not the AFC West team with the biggest steal, but the 2nd best AFC West team in this draft with Denver. Denver only had 5 selections. They made the most out of 3 of them and reached for 2. And the first one was a bit of a reach with Marvin Mims. He was my number 12 wide receiver, the 6th best on the board at this point, and 109th overall. Wide receivers shouldn't have been the first selection for Denver, but still, nonetheless, still okay value. There are better options available up to this point. If I'm going to go through my big board, Jalen Hyatt was a better pick. Josh Downs, Xavier Hutchinson went really late, but he would have been better. Raheem Jarrett went undrafted. Cyrus went really late too. But those guys were all better selections than Mims. Sorry. Drew Sanders was a good makeup for a bad first selection though, as Sanders gets an A+. Number 32 on my board, mid-second round talent. Number 3 linebacker, the number 2 out best on the board still. And this is just a perfect option for Denver's defense. He's extremely versatile. He can play edge if they need it. He can play inside linebacker if they need it. He can blitz if they need it. Just brings a fantastic defender to Denver, especially when it's a pretty big steal. And then they reach again with Riley Moss, a white cornerback. I had him as a 6th round talent and 188th on my board. 25th best corner and the 15th best available cornerback. Really big reach, but nonetheless, a positional value is there. They needed that cornerback in the 3rd round. Pretty good idea to take a guy like Riley Moss, but there were much better options on the board. And then you get another A+ pick in J.L. Skinner. He was number 98 on my board, a C+ talent, probably late 3rd, early 4th round talent here, and you get him in the 6th. Number 8 safety, the number 1 on the board at this point at 183. And fantastic value in the 6th round. He's going to be a good rotational safety. You got Caden Stearns on the come up. And you still got Justin Simmons. So that number 3 safety, if Kareem Jackson doesn't come back, is going to be J.L. Skinner. And then in the 7th round, 3rd to final pick, you take a good value in Alex Forsyth. Number 3 best interior offensive lineman on the board. Center. Your center is your worst position on the interior O-line. And again, he's not the best on the board, but it's still fantastic value for this depth-needy position at center. Starter would have been better. Maybe a guy like JMS wasn't available at pick 63. Even Luke Weipler would have been a better pick, but still get good value in the 7th round in Alex Forsyth. So Denver got a B+. All right, moving on to the front half of this list with the top 8, and we start with the Buffalo Bills. All right, so Buffalo, they had good picks in this draft, but they also had it balanced out by bad picks, and their first pick wasn't great with Dalton Kincaid. It's really going to depend on how they utilize him. So he's my number 35 on my board, 3rd best tight end, and he was the first tight end taken off the board, so 3rd best on the board. And again, not my tight end 1, and they have Dawson Knox, but if they can start using these 2 tight end sets and kind of utilize Kincaid as a receiver, that could be an efficient 2 tight end set. So we'll see how Buffalo does it. But they continued on with success early on. They took Osiris Torrance, which was a fantastic selection. Number 1 interior offensive lineman left on the board, 40th overall in this draft. And again, not the best on board in general, which is why I didn't get an A+, but still elite value. And you got him 2 picks after John Michael Schmitz went off the board, who was my number 1 interior offensive lineman in this draft. Would have been amazing if you got Michael Schmitz. Probably would have been an A+, but Torrance is still good nonetheless. And then you got Dorian Williams, another A-grade pick, 124th on my board. And he won, despite him going all the way up to 91, which is nearly 30 picks higher than over 30 picks higher than where I had him on my big board. He's still the 2nd best linebacker on the board. You need linebacker, and you could have traded down for him, or you could have taken Henry To'oTo'o, but still an A- selection because you got a position of need. And then you go with wide receiver, a guy who's not on my big board, and Justin Shorter. He got a D+ grade simply because this pick was just not needed. The depth is not particularly needed at this point, and it's a guy with undrafted talent. So wasn't a big fan. And then Nick Broker as well, 194th on my big board, number 3 on the interior offensive line. But this was not the biggest depth need for Buffalo at interior O-line. Still good value since he's going later than I have him on my big board, and he's the 3rd best interior O-lineman in general. Still, nonetheless, you didn't really need it. But you did need cornerback depth, And you got that in an absolute steal in Alex Austin, who is probably a top 3, top 5, if not top 5 steal in this draft to me. He's the number 1 corner on the board. He was the 14th best corner in this draft for me, 83rd overall. And this was just elite value in the 7th round. He should easily make the roster for Buffalo and should immediately come in as a pretty efficient and reliable corner early on. So Buffalo also gets a B+. Continuing on, number 7, now we have Indianapolis. So Indianapolis, they had 12 selections. It's hard to have a bad draft with this many selections, and Indianapolis kind of killed it at the beginning, but they did not bring in a lot of good depth. I've seen a lot of people potentially rating Indy as an A or A+ draft. I have them at a B+ because of how just okay their later rounds were. So we start with Anthony Richardson, who was the easy selection there, but he's not an A grade because he was number 53 on my big board, a late 2nd round talent, best QB on the board, but the number 3 QB. Again, it's not you. This would have been the best. This was the best pick for Indy here, but B+ was the ceiling for that selection, and due to his grade, it's not an A grade. And then they picked Julius Brents, who is the 6th best cornerback on the board at this point. They needed corner. And the next 6 corners next 7 actually had really close grades to each other. And they get very solid selection, but again, there were 5 better options. And you picked a guy 26 positions ahead of where I had him on my big board. And then they go with an A grade selection here with Josh Downs. Number 65 on my board, best wide receiver available. Great value. You have bigger needs outside of wide receiver, but still fantastic value at 79 for a guy like Downs. Excuse me. And then another A grade in Blake Freeland, who was 111th on my big board and went 106th. So not too far off, but he was the number 3 offensive tackle on the board. And DeJuan Jones would have been an A+, but still a fantastic value for a big need. And I say a big need because Raymond had a very lackluster rookie season at left tackle. Braden Smith was a bit disappointing last year at right tackle. Raymond might be better off playing on the inside of the line, so a left tackle was kind of needed. So actually, I mocked Anton Harris into this team, but Blake Freeland is still a really good value in the 4th round here. And another really good value, another A-grade pick in Adetomiwa Adebawore. I spelled his name wrong in the graphics, so please ignore that. But number 99 on my big board. I scouted him as an edge, but he's likely going to play on the interior defensive line. He's the 3rd best edge on the board up to this point, and that's a good replacement for Grover Stewart. Since Grover Stewart is, he's not great, but if they want to bench Grover Stewart, you have a good option in Adebawore, however you say his name. And he can also play on the outside if you want to in the Colts forefront. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how they utilize him. And we get back to the B grades here with Darius Rush. 167th on my big board, 9th best cornerback on the board up to this point. And there's definitely better corners to get the depth. Another cornerback here, though. This is your 2nd cornerback of the draft, which I was expecting them to take 3 defensive backs, and they took 4. But 3 defensive backs, I was expecting them to take this much. They need that depth and even starting talent at corner. So I like the pick of Darius Rush, but there were better options. Then you take Daniel Scott, 20 picks later, your 3rd defensive back, this time at safety, 6th best safety on the board. So a good value selection here, but there were still better options available. So that was my issue with this pick. And then Will Mallory starts a trend of not so good selections. So I've seen a lot of people like this Will Mallory pick, and I don't. 6th best tight end on the board, 227th on my big board, 7th round talent. They have Mo Cox, Jelani Woods, and Kyler Granson, who are all probably going to play over Will Mallory. There were 5 tight ends better than Mallory. You just did not need tight end depth. You needed a starting tight end. Jelani Woods is probably going to take over that starting position. I think he was a 3rd round pick, or maybe even a 4th round pick. And Mo Cox is still a solid tight end as well. So you didn't need that depth. So I don't know why you take Will Mallory here. Then you also got Evan Hull, running back in the same exact boat. He's the third best running back on the board. Good pick as in terms of talent, but you have Jonathan Taylor. You have Deion Jackson. You have Zach Moss. That's just wasting potential out of Evan Hull. And then the first undrafted talent that they took in this draft was Titus Leo, edge rusher. I am at a C-, and there are much better options on the board. Andre Carter, Iku Leota, Caleb Murphy. They all were undrafted, but you took an undrafted talent anyways in Titus Leo, so why not? And then Jalen Jones. At this point, this was a good pick, but you already took 2 corners. I don't think you needed to take a third. So 139th on my big board, and he was actually higher on my big board than Darius Rush. Third best cornerback on the board. It's just like, it's a good pick if they didn't already take 3 defensive backs before Jalen Jones. Then you took Jake Witt. Not on my board. The last picks, it's pick 236. So undrafted talents are okay, and they still get good depth selection on the O-line. There were just better options, so he gets a B+ and not an A grade. So Indianapolis also gets a B+. And I was saying before, we now have the biggest steal in the draft, and they still were 6th. That's how stacked this AFC draft class was. The team with the biggest steal comes in 6th, and that's Las Vegas Raiders. You started off the draft extremely well, but the later rounds outside of the biggest steal were just lackluster. Starts with Tyree Wilson, edge rusher. Probably going to play him on the interior line because he's not going to run outside linebacker. But 8th on my big board, second best edge left. And again, not a wow factor, A+ selection kind of vibe, but still, fantastic selection for the D-line here. And then even then, you take Michael Mayer later on. Number 1 tight end, number 1 talent left on the board, number 10 overall in this draft class. And this was a big steal in this draft, but they didn't really need tight end. They still get great value at pick 35, though, so it's still an A grade. And they continue on with the 3rd straight A grade in Byron Young out of Bama. Number 57th on my big board, late 2nd round talent, get him in the 3rd. Number 1 interior D lineman on the board. Again, this is not a wow factor selection, but it's still a fantastic selection simply because they really need interior defensive linemen. So he's probably going to start from day 1. Really good selection here. And now it kind of gets a bit lackluster starting with the 100th overall pick where you take Trey Tucker. 6th round talent to me, took him in the late 3rd. 190th on my big board, 14th best wideout at this point. It was the first miss from a great Vegas draft in the first 2 days. It was a good pick for needs, but a big reach. And then Jacorian Bennett kind of makes a little bit up there. You have 6 corners that are better than Bennett, but you really needed cornerback up to this point. So good selection for positional need. But 106th on the board at pick 104, still not great because you have 6 better corners available, which included, if you don't mind me going straight to my big board again, that included guys like, where's Jacorian Bennett? There he is. Travius Hodges Tomlinson went later. Clark Phillips just went a few picks later. And the next pick, which ended up being Keely Ringo, my number 6 corner. So that kind of shuffled into it a little bit because Keely Ringo was right there for you guys, and you took Jacorian Bennett. So still a big positional need, though, nonetheless. Back to the C grades with Aiden O'Connell. The reason for that is he was the 6th best quarterback on the board. If you needed backup quarterback, there were better options to back up Jimmy Garoppolo. O'Connell's he's not an NFL an NFL type, like new NFL age, like new age NFL quarterback. That's what I'm trying to say. He's not really a new age NFL quarterback. Jimmy G, he's not really going to develop. So I think there were better selections here. Possibly take a high upside quarterback like Malik Cunningham even would have been a better pick here. He went undrafted. But I mean, Jaron Hall probably would have been the best pick here for developmental reasons. And then you take the biggest steal in this draft with Christopher Smith. He was 39th on my big board, and he went 170. Number 2 safety in this draft class, number 1 on my board, left on my board, because Brian Branch went in the second round. And starting upside for Christopher Smith, potentially maybe even starting a nickelback to start, but nonetheless, I love Christopher Smith. And then Amari Burney at linebacker, not on my big board, gets a D+ grade, especially when you note that this was an undrafted free agent talent. It was not necessarily a good selection for depth. You needed a starter at linebacker. You didn't need depth. And then you ended off with Nesta Jade Silvera, which was another interior defensive line selection, number 4 interior D lineman on my board, 6th round talent in the 7th round. That should initiate a good grade, but he gets a C- simply because you have cornerback depth that you need, you have offensive line depth that you need, and you just decide to take another interior defensive lineman when it's already filled with a bunch of mid players. So another B+, but I promise we move on here from the B pluses, I believe, in the top 5. Yep, we move on from the B pluses. We move on to the A grades. Top 10 drafts as well. The Raiders were number 11, and now we are in the top 10, with all the top 10 being A grade drafts. And we start with the Houston Texans at number 5. So CJ Stroud is where we start. Number 6 on my big board. First round talent, of course. Number 2 quarterback, number 1 left on the board at pick 2. It gets an A- selection. It originally was not an A-. It was a B+. Excuse me. The reason I upped it to an A- is I kind of started to think, I thought they should have taken Will Anderson with pick 2, and then they traded up to get Will Anderson at pick 3. So that kind of upped the grade of CJ Stroud, as well as give Anderson an A+. Number 1 on my big board, Hall of Fame projection, of course, just number 1 player in general. And again, it's who I should have thought should have gone number 2, and they gave up a bit to get up to number 3, but still, it's worth it for such an elite prospect. And this is the reason why they weren't higher. They may have had 3 A+ grades, 5 A grades of their 9 selections. That's fantastic. The reason that they weren't higher is because they reached so hard on Juice Scruggs. This is the biggest reach in the entire draft. He's not even on my big board. I had met an undrafted talent. And it's such a big reach to call him your new center. Just, in my opinion, the worst selection in this entire draft. I hated this pick for Juice Scruggs, especially when you pick Jarrett Patterson later on, which I'll get here in a second. He's a center too. I have him scouted better than Juice Scruggs. So nonetheless, Tank Dell at pick 69 go with a B grade. Still, that's a solid selection. There are 5 receivers better, including Jalen Hyatt, who would have been a much better selection at wide receiver, but still an okay replacement for Cooks. You needed that wide out position, so still a solid depth. That's not really depth. Solid selection there. And then you go with Dylan Horton at 109, an A- selection there. He was the third best edge on the board, 67th overall. And great value for a big need. And the reason it was an A- is because you had an A+ pick available in Colby Wooden. And the reason for that is because he is so versatile for D-line. You run a 4-3. You run a 4-3 or a 4-2-5, whatever you're running this year. You run a 4 front. And Colby Wooden can play edge and interior defensive line. You already picked a peer edge. You picked a second peer edge. So Wooden would have been, who he got picked 7 picks later. Wooden would have been a better pick for versatile reasons, but still an A- out of Horton, and they still get another A+ anyways, right here in Henry To'oTo'o. At pick 167, nearly 100 higher than where I had him on my big board, which I had him at 79, or 100 lower, sorry. Early to mid 3rd round talent in the 5th round, and he's the number 1 linebacker left. He was the 4th best in the draft this year. You had 3 of the best picks in this entire draft and the worst pick in this draft. So, but nonetheless, you still have elite value for a big need on your defense. I don't think you're going to be able to roll forward with Christian Kirksey as your best linebacker. So then you move on, Jarrett Patterson. It gets a C because you took Juice Scruggs. If you didn't take Juice Scruggs, this would have been like an A, but you took him anyways. You had 3 better options at interior O-line. So you're likely going to have to put Patterson at guard, not where he's used to. Nonetheless, 6th round talent in the 6th round, still solid value nonetheless, so it still gets a C. And then you go to your third A+ selection, and I'm still screaming, why did you pick Juice Scruggs? Because if you didn't take Juice Scruggs, you probably would have had the best draft this year. You take Xavier Hutchinson, who is my number 8 wide receiver with early to mid 3rd round talent, and you got him in the 6th, late 6th round. Again, number 1 wide receiver on my board and another A+ pick. So 3 A+, and they still got an A- as an overall. And you ended off with Brandon Hill. Another good. You had okay depth with okay value, so it's an okay grade. So a B there. There were 4 better safeties than Brandon Hill on the board, but still a solid selection nonetheless. So A- for Houston in this draft. And we get into the top 4, and it just gets absolutely crazy from here. 4 of the best drafts, or 3 of the 4 best, were AFC North. Where was the other AFC North team? I have to remember. Let me scroll. Cleveland. Cleveland was number 10. The next AFC North teams are 4, 3, and 1. And it starts at number 4, A grade, Baltimore Ravens. So they only had 6 picks in this draft, but nonetheless, they were still worth your bit. So Zay Flowers is where it starts. Number 31 on my big board, A-, early 2nd round talent. Number 1 wide receiver, and it only got a B grade because you didn't really need wide receiver right here. Jordan Addison would have been a better pick because outside is your bigger need, but Duvernay is fine in the slot. Now you're just pushing Duvernay to the bench. So not the best overall selection. Also noting, linebacker was a pretty big need. Interior D-line was a pretty solid need, I believe so. Yes. But nonetheless, I mean, Zay Flowers still wasn't bad. And then you had Trenton Simpson, who was one of the biggest steals in this draft. He's number 17 on my big board, and he went number 86 overall. Number 1 linebacker, in my opinion, in the class. Number 1 left on the board. Just an absolute big steal, and he works perfectly for Baltimore. Patrick Queen's fifth-year option just got declined, too. So now you're adding on Trenton Simpson. Really good value if you're going to get rid of Patrick Queen. And then Tavius Robinson and an A-. 117th on my big board, went 124th. Number 2 edge at this point that was left, and number 1 was Andre Carter. He didn't get drafted, so nonetheless, I have there's just fantastic value at this selection. You had bigger needs at D-line and cornerback, but nonetheless, you still ended up getting a good edge rusher in Tavius Robinson. And then Q-Blue Kelly comes off the board, who is the 3rd best corner at this point, 15th best corner in this draft, 89th overall prospect. Another fantastic value here. He gets an A grade out of me. You needed that cornerback room, and I'm surprised you waited until the 5th round to take one, but you still got good value in the 5th round by taking a guy who was in late 3rd, early 4th round talent. And here's why it wasn't an A+ draft, because of this guy right here. Malesala Rumave-Laulu. I don't know if that's how you say his name. I tried my hardest, but this was not necessary. Offensive tackle, you don't need that depth particularly, especially when you know that there's still a good amount of talent on the board at offensive tackle at this point. Just to go through a couple. At pick 199, you had Ryan Hayes was on the board. Would have been a fantastic selection. Connor Galvin, who didn't go drafted. John Ojukwu, who didn't get drafted. If you traded up, you could have gotten Jalen Duncan at offensive tackle. I did not like this pick at all. It got an F grade out of me, and that's what ruined their chances at an A+ draft. And then they get an A+ prospect to end it off with Andrew Voorhees. Interior offensive line. Now here is that O-line depth you needed on the inside. So potential right guard replacement when Zeitler is finally, like, his career's over or he leaves. He's getting a bit old. But nonetheless, the only better interior O-lineman, which is guy who went undrafted, is Emil Ikior, or Akior, out of Alabama. He was the only better interior O-lineman. So this got an A+ grade out of me, and the Ravens get an A grade out of that. Now, these top 3 teams are the 3 teams that got A+ grades in the draft, and they all come out of the AFC. It starts with the Cincinnati Bengals, and the only reason that they didn't get any higher is because you see that orange at the bottom. That's literally it, because none of these other 2 teams had any C grade players that they selected. I don't care if it was the 7th round. They're the only A-plus they're the only A-plus draft that picked a C-grade guy. So Myles Murphy was the first pick. He was the number 1 edge on the board, number 3 overall, number 3 edge overall, number 11th prospect overall. Not the biggest positional need at all, but you still bring in extremely good value at 28. No matter what, it's kind of like when the Raiders selected Michael Mayer. It's not a need particularly, but because it was such a good value for 28, they pulled the trigger and picked the best position available or best player available, no matter the position. My opinion, it was Mayer. Mayer should have been the pick here, but Murphy still gets an A grade nonetheless. And then it moves on to DJ Turner. 49th on my big board, late 2nd round talent. 7th best corner in this class, 2nd best on the board up to this point, which Keely Ringo is number 1. And nonetheless, it was a really good value selection, but it only got an A- because you already have a fast corner in Chidobe Awuzie. And yeah, Turner might be that replacement, but you don't have a physical cornerback. Taylor Britt is not strong play strength-wise. Awuzie relies on speed. Turner relies on speed. So those short routes are not going to be great. You're going to allow a lot of short pass gains right here. But still good value for DJ Turner at pick 60. And then Jordan Battle gets an A+ at pick 95. He's the 2nd best safety on the board. And Smith may have been better even though he went off a bunch of picks later. But Battle is still A+ worthy, noting how great the value is when he's 46th overall in this class and the 3rd best safety in this class, and you get him here at 95. And then Charlie Jones, wide receiver, at 131. He was a 5th round talent, in my opinion, going in the 4th round, 12th best wide receiver on the board, and you get that should initiate a C grade, but nonetheless, I like this pick for some reason. Good depth in the slot. You have Tyler Boyd in the slot already, but if he was down a lot of last year. So if he goes down again, Charlie Jones can come in and play. So I like this. Now you got Chase Brown at pick 163. A grade. Another A grade. I love it. So he was 97th on my big board, 3rd best running back available up to this point. And I actually mocked Zach Evans in the 3rd round. He ended up going in the 7th. But I mocked Zach Evans to the Bengals in the 3rd round, and they get Chase Brown in the 5th round, which is debatably better value than Evans in the 3rd. So great value. I didn't expect Brown to be available this late. And if Mixon ends up having to step away for those off-the-field issues, Chase Brown can come in and provide pretty good efficiency for a 5th round selection. And then Iasivis going at 206 in the 6th round, A-, and he would have been an A+. They don't particularly need the wide receiver depth at this point, but they still get really good value in the 2nd best wide receiver on the board and the 100th best prospect in this draft. Late 3rd, early 4th round grade in the 6th round. That's still fantastic value even if you don't need the depth. Then Brad Robbins at punter. You need a punter. Good idea to snag one right here. There was a better option in Adam Korsak, in my opinion, but still get a punter here at a B grade. And this is why they weren't higher on the list, is because they had a C+ in DJ Ivey. Undrafted talent, in my opinion. You have both of the Oregon State corners in Alex Austin and Rajan Wright. I don't know how you say his name, or first name at least, but both of those guys were better value picks at this point, so it got a C+. I didn't really have DJ Ivey near my big board, so that's why you get the depth that you need, but you had much better options. That's my point. So they still get an A+ though. Great draft here out of Cincinnati, but it gets even better. Number 2 is Tennessee. Tennessee Titans here. So number 2 overall, number 2 in the AFC, and it started with Dowell's a B, not a C. So ignore that. But Tennessee here, they just blew it away. So it starts with Peter Skoronski, number 14 on my big board, number 2nd offensive tackle, number 2 on the board. Roderick Jones was my number 1 offensive tackle. And but this was overall a great O-line pick. It wasn't your biggest need, which was quarterback. I thought they were going to take Will Levis here at pick 11, but they take a good O-line, all-around O-lineman in Peter Skoronski. And then they trade up in round 2 to get Will Levis. I didn't expect this, but it was fantastic. Not A+ worthy simply because he's number 64 overall in this draft, number 4 quarterback, the number 1 quarterback on the board. But I thought it was the best. I thought Will Levis was the best pick at pick 11. They still get him in the second round. I think he's really good to develop behind Tannehill, since I think the ceiling for Will Levis is like a game manager, and that's exactly what Tannehill is. So I think you develop behind him for a year or two, and then you take over at starting QB. And then another A grade in Tyjae Spears, number 34 on my big board, the best running back, best running back available, third best running back in this draft behind Bijan and Jameer. And now you have great value here in the third round for a mid-second round talent. And if you can keep Henry especially, Tyjae Spears can work as a dual threat running back. And even if you get rid of Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears can still be RB1. He's a solid 3-down back. He just has size concerns. And then I may have thought Leonard Taylor was the better Cincinnati tight end, but Josh Weil is still an A grade in the 5th round here. Yeah, they might have taken him at 147 when he's 179 on my big board, but he was the 3rd best tight end available, and tight end depth was easily the best selection you could have gone with here, and they did exactly that. Again, I think Leonard Taylor, the other Cincinnati tight end, was better. They ended up going undrafted to the Jaguars, and Zach Kuntz was also better here as well. But Josh Weil, still a solid selection overall. And now you get your A+ selection. So you have 4 A's and an A+ to start this draft. And Jalen Duncan was an A+. 110th on my board, goes 186th overall, 9th best offensive tackle, best offensive tackle on the board, and this is just elite value right here. He works greatly as a potential starting right tackle. I don't know if Petit Frere, is that how you say his name? I don't know if he should be your starter at all. But nonetheless, still elite value here for Jalen Duncan. And the reason that it's not the best is because they have a B grade, not a C. A B grade here in Colton Dowell. He's not on my big board. A lot of wide receivers left that replicate what Dowell does. I don't think he's going to make the final roster, but wide receiver depth was probably the best selection here. So you still get a wide receiver depth in the 7th round, and you still get a B grade. So another A+, and somehow, some way, there was a team that could have topped an A+, 4 A's, and a B. There was one team in the entire league that bumped the bar up higher and had a better draft than this. That is Pittsburgh, if you can tell already. Pittsburgh, A++. And I say that because they did not have a single B grade player in this class. They had 2 A+, 3 A's, and 2 A-. Just an elite draft. And it starts with Broderick Jones. So Broderick Jones was the number 1 offensive tackle, in my opinion, in this class. The number 1 left on my big board. Number 5 overall on my big board. It was an elite trade up. 4th offensive tackle taken, especially when he's the number 1 tackle in this class. That's a steal. So elite value at pick 14 for Broderick Jones, and offensive tackle is their biggest need. So they nailed this selection. So that's why I have it at an A+. And then Joey Porter Jr. Almost had an A+, but he was like the 7th best prospect on the board, in my opinion, when he got taken right here. So that's not A+ worthy, but still. Number 22 on my big board, early 2nd round talent where they got him. 4th best corner in this class, the best available up to this point. And it's just fantastic value and another one of the biggest steals in this class. And then they get Keanu Benton at 49. And before I go on with Keanu Benton, I just thought of something. The Steelers didn't particularly have steals. They just had amazing value selections. So then, let me get back into Keanu Benton. Sorry for getting off task. He's number 42 on my big board, mid-second round talent, where they got him. 4th best interior D lineman. Take a guess. The best interior D lineman available. So they've gotten the best offensive tackle on the board, best cornerback on the board, best interior defensive lineman on the board. I actually mocked Keanu Benton to the Pittsburgh Steelers, where I actually had them taking Darnell Wright with Broderick Jones off the board, and I had them taking, who was it? I had the Steelers taking Keely Ringo, who ended up going later on. But nonetheless, I literally predicted offensive tackle, cornerback, and interior defensive lineman would be the first 3 picks that the Steelers should go with, and that's what they did. That's why they start here hot really early. And then they get possibly a top 5 steal in this draft in Darnell Washington. Why isn't he an A+? Because you don't really need tight end. You have Pratt Freiermuth. And I get Darnell Washington is going to be a great tight end too. He's probably just going to be a good blocker here for Steelers, but he's the best tight end on the board. So number one tackle, number 1 corner, number 1 D lineman, and number 1 tight end available for their first 4 selections is just elite. They didn't really need a tight end until later in the draft because they need the depth, but they didn't need it this early. But still one of the biggest deals in the draft. I would have taken Darnell Washington too. So elite value. And then they get their second A+ grade with Nick Herbig. 126th on my big board, mid to late 4th round talent, and he's the 21st best edge in this class, or if you want to play him at linebacker, he's the 8th best linebacker, and the 3rd best edge, 2nd best linebacker available. And the reason he's still an A+ is because he's a perfect versatile option for Pittsburgh's defense. They now get linebacker depth and edge depth in the late 4th round in Nick Herbig, and his brother's on Pittsburgh. That makes it even better. So you now have Joey Porter, whose father played for Pittsburgh, and now you have Nick Herbig, whose brother currently plays for Pittsburgh. Again, great value here, and I did mock Nick Herbig here as well, so that's another thing I mocked correctly, and my mock was what I think should happen. So nonetheless, an A+ pick. And then you don't have another pick until the 7th round, and you still nail it with 2 A- picks. You have Corey Trice, 6th best cornerback on the board, and cornerback depth was much needed along with a starter, and that's exactly what they did. So great value at 241. Excuse me. Trice was also 205 on my big board. You're getting him later than that. And an A- here for a guy who's undrafted talent in Spencer Anderson, but you still need an interior offensive lineman depth. So undrafted free agent this late is okay when the position's needed. Boom, they get the undrafted free agent talent, but still big need. So the Pittsburgh Steelers absolutely nailed this draft with, not in terms of steals or you got great value, but the reason why is because they picked the exact positions they needed to pick while still getting fantastic value anyways. So that's why the Pittsburgh Steelers were the best team, had the best draft this year, had the best draft in the AFC, best draft in the NFL, and had the only team that gets an A++. Possibly the best draft we've seen of any team in years. Actually, maybe the Giants could have topped that when they took. Maybe the Giants may have had a similar draft last year when they took Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeau. But nonetheless, that's it. So Pittsburgh wins the draft this year. That's my opinion. I want to hear your guys' opinion. So if you guys have anything, tell me in the comments below. I will respond to your comment. I'll debate with you. And yeah, those were the 16 AFC teams ranked from worst to best in the 2023 NFL Draft. If you did enjoy, please make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. So, without further ado, my name's Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and thank you guys so much for choosing this channel as your source of sports coverage. I'll see you guys in the next video.